Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Jasmine Nolan Eccles. I'm going to call today's Charter Commission of the City of St. Louis public meeting to order. The first order on the agenda is the roll call and approval of the January 8th meeting minutes from Secretary Bobo.
Here we go. Okay, so when I call your name, please signify that you are here by saying here or present. Chair Nolan Eccles. Present. Vice Chair Sheridan.
Present.
Commissioner Crossland.
Present.
Commissioner Dwight. Present. Commissioner Garth. Commissioner Grant. Commissioner Intagliata.
Oh, did you call my name? I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm present.
Okay. Commissioner Intagliata.
Present.
Commissioner Riley. And Secretary Bobo, I am here. Now I will also call the non-voting members of the commission, the Honorable Joseph Vollmer, Director Casey Milberg, Ms. Tiara Thomas, Director Christine Ingracia, City Councilor Sheena Hamilton, and I do have a note that she is traveling, and then Director Sonia Gray, and Mr. Jake Hummel. That concludes the roll. So by now, hopefully everyone has had a moment to review our last regular meeting minutes, and I will now entertain a motion to approve of those minutes. And if you could do so by...
So moved.
Thank you. It has been moved. Do we have a second? Thank you. And now I will take a vote for all those in favor of passing the meeting minutes from the January meeting.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Bobo. The item number 3 on the Charter Commission agenda is the chair's report, and it will be in your February folder, your Google Drive, pertaining to all the documents for this month. But the primary areas of the chair's report, the first order of business is the Commissioner Garth has a standing obligation on Mondays at this time. We did the coordination to determine if this room would be available at the 4:30 time slot instead of the 7 p.m. time slot. In order for him to attend, we would have to move the meeting up. Otherwise, he won't be able to attend for the rest of the duration of the process. In addition to that, the building closes at a particular time. I expect that our meetings will get longer due to the addressing of the drafting and the discussion pertaining to the articles. So I would like us to discuss an entertainment for a motion to move the meetings to the amended 4:30 time over the 7 p.m. time so that Parliamentarian Garth could attend our public meetings and so that we're not cut off at the time the building closes.
So Mondays still, but just up till 4:30 here in this room.
Yes. Is there any other comment, question, or discussion pertaining to the 4:30 time?
I don't have an issue with it.
I just wanted to mention
You
that
making a motion, Chair?
We have a discussion on the floor too.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a quick comment that the building does not close. We have to make sure that we have support from the marshals, and that at the next meeting in March, we already have, I think, a special Charter Commission meeting. So I just wanted to make sure we didn't lose sight of that at 4 p.m. on March 4th.
Those times is 4, correct? So the issue is the 7 p.m. time omits Commissioner Garth from attending. And then the last meeting, we have documented confusion pertaining to the building closing while we were meeting, having to rush the meeting. So that is primarily what he raised at this last special meeting that we had. So I'm looking for us to entertain moving the meeting to the 4:30 time on the same Monday in the same space and building.
Yeah, I think the clarification, the question for clarification was that on March the 4th, when we have a 7 PM meeting already scheduled, we already have a 4 PM on best practices of charter reform scheduled. And so we have something scheduled already during that period.
Just on that one day, correct? Yes.
It's on that one day, and I believe that meeting for us is virtual. And I believe that meeting is virtual.
Can it be held to only half an hour?
It's one of the special meetings that I requested last public meeting.
Just to clarify, which meeting is it, Director Ingracia?
The meetings with Professor Todd Swanstrom from UMSL.
So that's the big one, having to do with the previous charter reform initiatives and why they may have failed?
That's the topic, yes.
Yeah. That may be difficult within a half hour. I wonder if it's possible to move that meeting up to 3:30?
Either moving that meeting earlier or possibly starting the Charter Commission meeting at 5 p.m.
5 o'clock, yeah.
Between the 4:30 and 5:30 time is what he recommended, because the 7 PM is his hard start for the treasurer's classes that he teaches.
So our first preference would be to move the meeting with Professor Swanstrom to 3:30. And if that wasn't possible because of his schedule, we could leave it at 4 and we could begin this meeting at 5.
Correct.
I'll have somebody from the Charter Commission staff check with Professor Swanstrom, and we will report back.
Thank you.
I'm emailing the Charter Commission staff now about the special meeting request and seeing if we can get an additional time, if there is additional time. But for the sake of doing that, we would definitely need to entertain a motion at this time. So Commissioner Cross, on the entertainment of the motion would sound like pending approval of the moving.
I make a motion that pending the successful rescheduling of our now scheduled at 4 p.m. Special meeting on March the 4th, that we move our normal monthly charter meeting up from 7 p.m. to either 4:30 p.m. or 5 p.m. start.
Do we have a second for the motion?
Okay, so with that motion, or all those in favor, can you say aye or raise your hand?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, the motion carries.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the training and hearing from the Board of Election Commissioners, in which I requested, by way of some of the concerns we have about the ballot and what can be placed on the ballot. In your bundle passed out here, the Election Commission has completed a document for us to reference during this training and hearing process pertaining to what they find is the necessary process for us to follow pertaining to the ballot and the concerns that we have. So if you could reference that while the training and hearing is occurring, in reference to what it is that we have voiced concerns about, I think that would help us along the way. Do we have someone here from the Board of Election Commissioners? Hello, gentlemen. Join us. The floor is yours pertaining to a presentation and we will follow your email documents as you're presenting.
Good evening. So my name is Gary Stoff. I'm the Republican Director of Elections. Ben Borgmeyer is the Democrat Director of Elections. Based on the questions that you have posed, we prepared a document that we think addresses most of your concerns, but we're happy to answer any questions. The main thing I would point out, and Ben can elaborate, your mandate is contained in the charter provision Prop C that passed in April of 2023 and is now part of the city charter, Article 5, Section 7. So whatever that document provides in terms of the commission should do this or that or the other thing, that's your operating mandate. From our perspective, as the election authority, we conduct elections in the city of St. Louis, and there are two provisions of state statute that have relevance to your work. One is, under your mandate, any recommendation that you might have needs to go on a general election ballot. And under state statute, it provides certain dates that are available for elections, one of which is the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November of an even-numbered year. That's a general election date. The other provision that's relevant to your work is that any measure, any proposition, any candidates that are going to appear on a ballot, we have to receive, as the election authority, official notification to that effect at least 10 Tuesdays before the election, which in this case of 2024 is August 27. So whatever work you do, whatever recommendations you have, whatever public hearings you're required to have, whatever publication dates of drafts, that's entirely your prerogative, your responsibility. For our purposes as the election authority, if we get whatever notice that you have, whatever you want to appear on a ballot to go before the voters, we need to receive that by August 27. And I'd like to share the microphone with Ben because he's done a lot of research in this regard.
Hello. I would agree 100% with what Gary said. The key thing is the form that the election, what you're calling the ballot issues, come to us, and that it's at a proper time. Other than that, there's really not a lot to it as far as what we do. As long as it's in the proper form, we put it on the ballot. As far as the idea of like limitation of issues, there's no number. I guess keep in mind November is usually a long ballot, and so as far as what you decide to put on there and how you decide to put on it. But other than that, there's really nothing as far as instruction that we can give you on how to do your job. Yes.
Are there guidelines on how to? Are there guidelines on the language to be used or format for the language?
I guess the short answer to that is no. Part of the provision is that whatever comes to us has a sample ballot on it with it. I think whatever the sample ballot language that you would put on there is what we would accept and what we would put before voters. Whether there's a separate challenge to that language, that would be not really our issue or our call. But essentially if the form comes to us and it has the ballot language on there, that's what we would put on the ballot.
Great. Thank you. Could I ask a related question? And you may not know the answer, but
Gary, what do you think?
come back to
Do we
us.
let him do it? All right, sure.
Commissioners, you can ask what you want.
Thank you. Appreciate that. There's been lots of talk, including in a couple meetings with you gents, about perhaps changing general and primary election dates, and that's been very helpful. For school board elections, and earnings tax elections, what would be the process to be able to get those to be on an August or November even year ballot?
So I'll let Gary speak to that. We were just speaking about this the other day in the office.
That would really be something that has to come from the Missouri legislature because their statutory provision, I'm sorry, well, Board of Education, what was the second one? I'm sorry. Earnings tax, I think, is charter. Right. But the Board of Education, that's established by state statute. Once upon a time, they were all in April. But the way they are set up with two members elected one time, two another time, three another time, they would occasionally run into a situation where there was an election in an April of an even-numbered year. We didn't have an election in the city because municipal elections are in an odd-numbered year, which meant that the Board of Education had to pick up the tab themselves. At some point in time, they were able to convince the Missouri legislature to change that particular election to November of the same year when you have a presidential, so they could not have to bear the entire cost themselves.
So the state legislature would have to pass a bill moving St. Louis City's school board election to either August or November at our behest.
Yes.
Okay.
Because
Thank
right now it's established in state statute, the way that cycle goes. And so I'm not sure the commission has any authority to change that. But if somebody were to petition the state legislature or go to your state reps and say, here's an issue we're dealing with, and we'd like someone to introduce a bill, I think that'd be the way to go for the Board of Education.
And are all school boards in the state, do all school boards in the state hold April elections, or do some hold August or November elections?
So, I mean, it's all, I can't remember the chapter in the statutes as far as other school boards. You know, I only looked at it and kind of glancing, because when you find, it's all in the same chapter. And I believe all other school boards are in April, because April is the general municipal day. And I believe that is when their elections are held for school board.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I have a question about ballot language and the process for that to be formed and finalized. So I really appreciate you all repeating the part of the charter that kind of explains exactly what we need to produce, and that we could do a new charter. It says, be it a new charter, charter provision, or amendment. So there might be something that we're submitting that has multiple components to it, or if it's a new charter, right, that might include a number of changes to it. The summary ballot language, how does that get written? Do we propose something, or do you all come up with language?
So in the notice of election, when that's prepared, the notice of election has to have the ballot language in it.
Okay.
And that's simply it. And however you decide to craft it to make it intelligible to vote.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm looking at some concerns here via email. Just going to have them addressed now.
Okay.
There's the issue with the deadline, I believe, is addressed in your document with when we need to present the recommendations for the ballot. I believe that the deadline answers the sufficient time issue, and the process for submitting pertaining to the ballot is also in your document, if I read correctly. My particular question is there a such thing as ballot fatigue or too many recommendations from the commission for the ballot pertaining to the fact that the ordinance calls for these recommendations? Is there a such thing as too many, not enough, or what would your recommendation be for this commission pertaining to the recommendations we have to put forward?
Well, I mean, you only get one shot, right?
Correct.
So I mean, my recommendation would be whatever shot you're going to take. I mean, I would make it substantial, legitimate, and something that voters would be eager to say yes or no to. So, I think that as far as other than that, I mean, I really don't have a comment. Ballot fatigue is a real thing. I mean, what happens in November is you have, all the electeds, then you have judges. So I can't remember how many judges are on the circuit court, but that's all on there. And then likely the ballot issues follow that. So you can see a decline as people go down the ballot as far as what people are voting. And so is it about fatigue, or is it more of an education piece to it? I mean, you get out in front of voters and try to educate voters on what's on the ballot and why it's important to them? I mean, maybe that's the cure. I mean, maybe by the time people get to the end, they don't know. I mean, we try to do, we do with every election a sample ballot. So with the idea that when voters go to the polls, they have an idea of what's going to be on the ballot, so that when they receive in the mail, maybe they will do their own research into the issues and come to the polls with an idea of what they're going to do when they show. So, I would hope that if it's important to the voter, ballot fatigue shouldn't matter. But that's just me, probably wishful thinking.
Well, I think all that is accurate, but I would also keep in mind when you craft whatever, you've had the benefit of working together for the better part of a year. You've had public input, and most voters are going to see what's on the ballot. And so whatever you craft, you want it to be something that the voter will be able to understand. So even if you do an entirely new charter, you can't very well put the whole charter on the ballot, but whatever you have will have copies available at the polling place. But when a voter comes in to vote, are they going to take the time to read through a very long proposition? I don't have an answer for that, but then it comes down to promotion, advertising, informing voters. We can do what we can do, but if you're the proponents of changes to the charter, then you need to do what you can do from your perspective.
That brings up a question for the commissioners to discuss, and I'd love to have a bit of discussion around this. One, and I think it came up in the public hearing at the History Museum, and Commissioner Intagliata provided some additional a framework, and that is, how do we bundle the recommended amendments so that they are palatable and digestible by the general population when we have time to vote. The second piece, and it does pertain to the timeline, and that is allowing time either for a public information campaign, putting this information out in front of the community, and or some degree of polling to determine the likelihood of these various amendments passing. We don't have that built into the timeline. That's not a question for you gentlemen to answer, by the way. It's a question for us to wrestle with, using the wrestling that's going across. Yeah, I was going to work wrestling in somehow into this. So I think those are two things that we should think about, and it did come, like I said, it came up in the public hearing. How do we package the amendments or bundle them so that we're not just putting 15 individual amendments or recommended amendments or changes on the ballot? Maybe we bundle some, but we also know that there are some that are dependent on others, and so if we change one and it gets approved by the voters, yet another part doesn't, that could be detrimental because it could break the system.
I think that's a question. A question in there for you all is, if we look to bundle the issues pertaining to the articles, do the items on the ballot have to directly reflect what's changing in the article itself verbatim? Literal article, item, word, sentence, does it have to reflect it pertaining to what they're voting for on the ballot specifically, or can it be bundled in this fashion that we're speaking to pertaining to topic matter?
Prop C was a huge long document that got boiled down to like a paragraph of language. It was something that was not easy probably to do. However, it's like probably whatever you do, I would probably run it by the city councilor's office and talk to them about how it looks and what it appears to be on its surface. But as far as citing specific provisions that are being repealed or addressed. There's no requirements as to any of that. But I think whatever the ballot language be has to accurately reflect what the legislation is.
Chair, I believe that the city councilor's opinion that she published, sent to us earlier, in fact, looks at that issue and talks about when we'll be able to bundle and when we won't necessarily be able to bundle. And so we should probably all take a closer look at that as we're starting to get closer to language issues as opposed to the larger theoretical things that we were talking about.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, where was that?
I was posted on our on the Google Drive maybe a month or 6 weeks ago, about 5-page document.
It's in your commission staff
Yeah.
document, and we'll get to that later in the agenda. But it's in your,
tonight's document.
it's in this bundle. It's in here,
Okay.
specifically speaking to the language and the concerns I raised about the elections. But while we have the Board of Elections before us, there were several questions that came up from different commissioners about the ballot. And I want to make sure that while we have them, have their attention, and they're able to answer our questions, that we're utilizing this time to ask the questions we may have about and pertaining to the election process and the ballot in its totality. Okay. Thank you. Secretary Bobo, any questions? Okay. Commissioner Riley? Okay. Commissioner Tagliata? Commissioner Dwight? Commissioner Grant? Okay. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for your presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. And I think we're coming back later in the month to visit with you. So
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is public comment. Go ahead. In the bundle that is provided to us on the document here with the agenda, this bundle here. You got it?
There's a memo from the,
Oh, I believe it is page, we'll go to the pages. Page 8.
I don't see anything about bundling in here. I think it's under separate.
That's a different document.
Right.
So she speaks to, so. Where was bundling in here? It's not in the memorandum. It's in the February Google Drive, the February documents Google Drive link via email. It's also in the reminder email that they send out before our public meetings. But pertaining to the bundling specifically, the city councilor is going to give us, I would say, our marching orders pertaining to what that needs to look like or what it would look like. And I believe we can ask her those questions when she's present, but she's spoken to them. And there's language in the February Google Drive document sent to all of us via email. I believe if it wasn't today, it was late last week. Correct, Commissioner Crossland?
Yeah, this isn't the same memo that she sent for this meeting.
Okay. What memo was it specifically with the dates so that Commissioner Intagliata can find it?
Was there a clear directive in that issue, or was it more contemplative?
She was responding to our questions about whether there were certain kinds of subjects across the charter that we would be able to bundle as opposed to having to list each change separately. And I believe it's a large memo, and so I don't want to distill all of it, but it had to do with subject areas and like subject areas and being able to cluster in that way. Did you find it then? Yeah.
Commissioner Grant's just showing it to me.
Yeah.
Could somebody,
I can request the clarity provided for.
what can we do? Maybe not something that's 8 or 10 pages, but a single page, kind of an overview would be much more helpful, perhaps. So that would be fantastic.
I think we can request that of the city councilor's office, and on the agenda, they could present that at the next meeting for us. Okay. The next agenda item is public comment. Vice Chair,
Have we received any slips in advance?
no.
Okay. Is there any public comment this evening? We want to hold time and space for anybody that'd like to make a comment to the Charter Commission?
Pertaining to elections, pertaining to any articles, any issues?
No? Go ahead, sir.
Okay, once again, I was here last week, and Madam Chair asked me to bring my son with me who would like to live in the city. And I talked about the giving away the land to developers, in which my son would like to actually live in the city and actually build his own house. Madam Chair asked me to bring him. I did. He does not want to speak. No, he does not. But we're still looking at the same thing, is that we are giving away property, city property, to developers with no sense of community. And we have to get back to the community to build the city up. And whether he wants to speak or not, coming from me, who would love for him to come up here, but just the fact that if we keep giving this land away, we've lost our sense of community, and we've pretty much have sold ourselves to, or given everything over to the whim of the, given everything over to the dollar, in which we don't make that dollar back as quickly as we would with people developing land and moving forward, instead of holding out and hoping that someone moves in and then we can build up on that afterwards. But that's my piece.
Can you speak specifically to where this is occurring, or where this issue?
Well, we have the city of, they're giving away the land to developers, who the developers are not, they're holding onto the land, in which the taxes that they're paying are much less than if you had two people come in and build a house and pay the taxes on that. Because if they're paying taxes on a $200,000 house, yet the developers only have to use one address for the land that they have, then taxes go, we're going in the wrong direction on our taxes. And how can we build up how can we build up the city? How can we build up numbers? And where does our city actually go? Because we're going in a negative direction. So let's make sure that we get people in the city who want to build up our properties. North City there's parts of North City that are just a desert. There's nothing there. But the land is owned by someone, not the city. It's land owned by someone that we're not paying taxes on. At least let's get the taxes for it. That's my thing. Any
other public comments? Thank you. Is there any questions from the commissioners?
Commissioners, do we know which articles the land issues are reflective in, and how they would show up in our work? I think this particular issue pertaining to land and taxes has come up in 3 different public comment and an additional report, and at our public hearing. So if we could discuss which article or how or where we could reflect the concern and the issue pertaining to land and taxes and how it's allocated and associated for the sake of the public.
I don't believe there is anywhere specifically in the Charter Commission that discusses land use and taxes. As Commissioner Crossland was mentioning to me, it might be an ordinance, probably through SLDC and LRA, but I don't think, I just did a quick cursory search of the Charter Commission or the Charter and looked at it again. I didn't see anything specifically related to that topic.
Yeah.
The commissioners might have a
The
different
charter
opinion.
is very broad. I think I said at the last meeting, in fact, that when you think of the charter, you think of the Constitution. And when you think of the ordinances, you think of the laws and the ways that you do the business of the government. And the charter itself is 50 pages. It mentions eminent domain. It mentions deteriorated properties. But the actual processes and what happens with them and the taxation process and all of that kind of stuff is probably buried in ordinances. It's not in the charter itself. That's the question. The question then becomes, well, as part of a charter revamp, what do you put in it and what don't you? And how do we address the kinds of things we're talking about here? Are these things that we address through the charter, through the core working document of government, or are these things that need to be addressed legislatively through our alder people and our legislative process itself? Because that's where ordinance comes from.
If I could just add quickly to that, something for you all to contemplate that makes it a bit more complex is that the St. Louis Development Corporation, people use SLDC as the acronym, is the development arm of the city, but it is not a city department. It is its own separate entity. And then the LRA, which is a holding entity for a lot of property in the city of St. Louis, is a political subdivision of the state and not the city. And so those are things that you will need to be thinking about as you make those decisions.
I think I want to add to that by saying I marked 3 of the articles in which the issues pertaining to taxes, land and property are the responsibility of the city to regulate. And the issue is that because we don't see the reflective or associated ordinances in the charter, does not mean that the charter does not govern these particular activities. I went to, for example, the article pertaining to licenses and taxes. I went to Board of Public Service, and I went to special tax bills. And the issue that has come up several times in public hearings, emails, and reports is that the charter does not reflect all that it should. And are these issues that should be reflective in the charter? Are these concerns that should be reflective in the charter so that the city can be governed by said responsibilities? I think that's more of what the public wants to hear and understand and have us to determine or navigate. In some aspects, we wanted the public to be involved, and I think that it's important for us to at least consider where, if at all, this should be. For example, we have special meeting that occurred last week that spoke greatly about accountability and the structures in which are omitted from the charter. If areas of how communities and neighborhoods buy and sell land where residents live is not reflective in the governing document in which governs all departments, divisions, and officials of the city, I believe we have a problem.
Well, we have an additional layer to the challenge too, though, which Director Ingracia just pointed out, which is that the LRA, the Land Reutilization Authority, is a state entity. It's not even an entity that we have control over. So writing something into the charter may not be realistic because it may well end up being in conflict with the state process under which the LRA operates.
So it may need to be that as a commission, we look at what the state governs pertaining to this particular issue, because I want to re-inform us that the public has brought this up on several different instances. And so if the state has legislative documentation or processes that addresses that, if we could find a means and a way, again, as the Elections Commission said, to educate the public on these particular areas, I think it's important to. Go ahead.
Well, and that's a really important thing that we do, is to educate the public so that within all of these constrictions that we talk about, the things that they can do, they're able to do because they're knowledgeable.
Commissioner Dwight?
One opportunity could be to look to other localities like across the country that maybe have thought, as they did charter changes, they thought about the land issue. But I do hear you, Commissioner Crosland, and as others have stated, that some of these, we just may be superseded by other state laws that dictate that. There was one issue that we may be able to change, which was, I don't remember where we heard it, but there's a limitation on fines that can be imposed on property owners for violations of code or generally being a problem landowner within the city. And I do remember hearing from someone that that was an issue and meant that, you know, that fine maybe was very significant 100 years ago, but today is really just a slap on the wrist. I may have found it. Yes, it's, I believe, section 24, 500. We may be looking at the same places. I was talking to Commissioner Ingracia about this, but I think it limits it to $500, which is just not a significant sum today for a fine of this type.
What article is that in? You said section 24, but what article? Do you know
It's Article 4
Article 4, thank you.
and 24.
Board of Aldermen section, yeah, Alderman 4, Board of Aldermen, section 24, fines and imprisonment.
Yeah, I recollect that was brought up during the interview that we had with some of the alder people earlier, that they felt that it was ineffective in being able to deal with problem landlords right now, and that they needed more freedom to be able to commensurately address violations, significant violations.
If it's helpful information that has ballot more broadly several times and has been turned down by city voters, and it's my understanding the feedback was that in an effort to avoid being punitive towards like your sweet grandmother who may not be able to pay her taxes on her home versus the city's ability to be more thoughtful about how they would implement something like that, it's been turned down on the ballot. But recently, there was an alderperson who put an increase in fees from 500 to 1,000 that did pass at the ballot. So in limited circumstances, it has been accepted at the ballot by voters.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you.
Okay, do we have any more discussion on that public comment? I believe we walked into item number 6, we're discussing the work group progress. And if you're flipping through your articles, we are in Group 1's presentation pertaining to public service and finance. Commissioner Garth, Commissioner Grant, and Commissioner Dwight, if you could speak to your work group's progress this month pertaining to your article.
I'll volunteer to summarize our work group meeting. We spoke with Rich Bradley, President of the Board of Public Service. He gave us an overview of the functions of the Board of Public Service and the departments underneath it, and sort of reviewed the various duties they all had. And how much of the functions, whether construction, design, planning, are done through federal grants There were a series of questions posed to Mr. Bradley about ward money that alder people control and how that is used and the decisions are made. And he explained that process. There was a number of questions posed to Mr. Bradley about the Department of Transportation that has been mentioned by a number of interested citizens. And I think it's fair to say that he is skeptical of the need for a Department of Transportation, believing that the existing departments underneath the Board of Public Service cooperate and coordinate with each other. There was some pushback on that about whether there is within those departments, which are somewhat siloed, if there is a comprehensive vision for transportation that encompasses not only vehicles and streets, but pedestrians, bicycle, traffic, public transit. He believed there was, as reflected in the comprehensive streets ordinance, but there was a robust discussion about that. And then he proposed, I would call them housekeeping changes to the charter, reflecting updates in functions and language, the names of departments, those sorts of matters, relatively minor. He was asked if there were any structural changes needed, and he replied, really none, that he believed that there was sufficient transparency and checks and balances within the current system that operated well, and that no other changes really needed to be made. And then there was a discussion about the adequacy of citizen input, or the ability for citizens to provide input into the Board of Public Service, and Mr. Bradley talked about the availability to appear before meetings and to talk to him. So that pretty much summarizes our meeting with him. Commissioner Dwight or Milberg, have anything else to add?
Just more broadly about how our work group is moving towards the deadline for submission of amendments. At the last meeting, in addition to talking with President Bradley, we started to collect a list of changes that we're considering as a work group, not with any value judgment on it, just kind of really compiling everything that's been brought up in our various meetings, suggested either by the public or also by some of the speakers that had come. And we're really planning, we have one more meeting before that deadline where I think we're going to really kind of process through them to get towards those final ones that we'll be recommending.
So as you reflect on what you heard in our public meeting, public hearing, and in hearing the testimony of the Board of Public Service, how do you reconcile those two perspectives?
On public engagement and the role, is that what you're asking? That last part of the meeting?
Yes, so we've heard several times not the need for Department of Transportation. So the people see one thing, but you heard the exact opposite from those who are in the role now. I'm just wondering if you have any early thoughts on the difference in the gap in understanding.
Yeah, we had a pretty robust discussion in that part of it. That was a pretty significant part of that interview, and we had a variety of follow-up questions between Commissioner Grant and myself, and about both what you had just talked about, are those functions is that collaboration? I offered a analogy to the Department of Public Safety, where we have a conception of a theory of what public safety means for the city. And because of that, we structurally build in a variety, it's not just police and fire, it's also buildings, code enforcement, a variety of things that our charter believes need to coordinate well and collaborate well towards safety. So in that same, what I'm hearing from some of the proponents of a transportation department is we lack that kind of structural collaboration around transportation, and that we could benefit from that. So I posed that question. So there was robust discussion. We just haven't come to like
I think
final.
I think there's always a challenge. Oh, I'm sorry, did I interrupt you?
That we haven't come to a final decision on what to recommend.
I think there's always a challenge not seeking input from the department heads, but recognizing there could be inherent bias built into some of the responses. One of the things that might benefit us is to look at similar sized cities with similar aged infrastructure and see how they are organized and what departments they have in place. Also looking at, do cities that have traffic departments and have fewer pedestrian deaths, what does it look like from a comprehensive planning standpoint? Because I think just like we are discussing a lot of these getting information from a lot of department heads, we have to recognize the inherent bias in the council and the information they are giving us.
I think you're so right. That's absolutely true. And we did give quite a bit of pushback. One of something that was brought up is he was like, there's one city region across the country that has moved towards this kind of combined transportation department that didn't work out, which was Chattanooga. Which is interesting. We'll look into it, but we named a variety of other localities that had been cited that have had some positive outcomes from going to Department of Transportation, which I think included Chicago, Boston, Denver, a variety of other ones. So we are kind of not just taking it at face value.
Yeah, there is memos or reports that have been put into the Google file about, but by, I forget what was the name, not TrailNet, but about the cities that have adopted recently departments of transportation, which is pretty informative. It's pretty interesting. It's available for anyone to read, including the public.
For you all, I had a email from a member of the public that was trying to join the work group, and he stated that he had some technical issue with joining the work group, but he wanted specifically to ask the question that I posed at the work group about how does the public engage with the Department of Public Service, and what does engagement with the public look like, and how do they communicate projects, updates, transitions, no transitions, or, a lot of the things that you all were posing. The member of the public simply wanted to know how do they communicate with the department. And upon asking that question, I believe that I ran into what it is that the member of the public was referencing as a concern. So I don't believe that we put constraints on how members of the public interact with us in work groups, or did we set timeframes and any parameters on how members of the public can engage with us in work groups?
We haven't had any limitations on their ability to join or speak. We've had several people join for all of our work group meetings and been able to open up the floor to them. So there might just been a specific technical issue for that one person, but generally we don't have any limitations.
Okay. So I think the matter was I experienced the requirement of the raising of the hand, and there was a message that was sent to me about how I could respond or when I could respond. I believe this is an older member of the public. So those parameters or those barriers is what I believe they're encountering or experiencing when trying to navigate all of our work groups. So if we could, I've spoken to the city council's office and the commission staff pertaining to it, but I believe his concern primarily was, we've said in the public meetings that we want public comment and engagement and interaction. And if we in fact want that, when they arrive at the work group meetings that don't have structure on how to engage, that they're not met with the 3 minutes and the meeting rules and regulations and the raising of the hand and all of these different things, because members of the public are struggling to follow us and to interact with us virtually, which is why a lot of them apparently are not. But I got to ask his question for him by joining as a guest on the work group meeting. So I'm just bringing that up to the total commission so you all understand what was requested by a member of the public pertaining to the work group meeting.
And are you saying this has happened on several occasions, or you've gotten one instance? Because it sounded like what Commissioner Dwight said is that they've had a number of public meetings in the work groups, and that the public has been able to participate.
Yes.
I'm just wondering how if it's isolated or if it's frequent.
It was this particular meeting, and I believe it was a gentleman that I met with at the town hall and told them about the work group meetings that would be specifically addressing public service. And so he went to, follow the agenda and sign in and all of that. And the interaction did not appear to be an open forum. So he removed himself and emailed the first email that he saw, including the email that I provided him at the town hall. So I'm just stating that we are kind of cognizant of not applying layers or boundaries on the work group meetings or any of the meetings for the public to engage or interact with us. But I've added myself as a panel to make sure that people of the public that email me and ask for, there are even requests for documents that are in work groups that I haven't seen, that members of the public are requesting that we haven't publicized, that I'm not sure of. So while we're navigating our work group process and we're, again, engaging the public, if there are documents that are being presented or worksheets or something to this degree.
So just for my clarity, so that I understand, again, is this an isolated incident with one person? Because that's what it sounds like.
No. So the particular issue this past week or the week before last, where the public service department was presenting, that was an isolated issue.
Mm-hmm.
There's an additional isolated issue with documents that are being presented in the work groups that are not on the website for the public to follow. So I'm not certain which work groups are presenting worksheets or work documents of some sort, but the particular email I have from the gentleman is asking for documents that myself or the city councilor don't have access to. So I'm just bringing it to the total body,
right?
Because we're on work group 1, that if there is any particular barrier for the public to interact with us or any particular documents that we have not given to the city councilor's office or the commission staff to put on the website, that those are concerns coming from the public.
That's fair. So I think for me, in fairness, it probably is behoove of us to say, were there any documents shared among any of us in our work groups that the public has not seen or does not have access to? Because I can only speak for our work group 3. We haven't had any documents.
The only documents that I would recollect that were shared, for instance, within our work group that would not have been posted already were the documents that were produced by the speakers who actually had, I think the personnel department, she had posted it literally an hour or something before our meeting. I know the mayor had a document also. Those would not have been on the site already because they were simply making the report at that point and they would be posted later. But the actual work group members themselves, I don't believe had anything that wasn't already posted.
I think it's important for obviously equity and also to facilitate understanding amongst everyone. And I think it's important also in the same vein for us to kind of communicate that we are doing everything in our power to be equitable in the way that we share information, in the way that we post information. I'm on our Charter Commission website now. All of that information is public and made public in advance per requirements by law and ordinance and other things of that nature. So, and I want to be clear, I'm not at all trying to be defensive. I just want us to be fair about whatever this comment is, because again, it sounds like one individual, and certainly that individual does obviously have a stake, as do all citizens, but this sounds very isolated. And I don't know what other documents they could be referring to.
So in reading the email, there's, I believe, the ex officio members in work group 1 and work group 2. There is a worksheet that she's referencing that gets pulled up on the slides or in the videos. I've responded that I'm going to look at the past work group meetings to see what worksheet it is, because I was not privy to it. I'm in work group 3, but I wasn't privy to any documents that were being shared screen per se. So I've said that I'm going to look into it and make sure that the documents are present on the commission's website. But what I'm trying to do is make sure that I communicate to you all concerns pertaining to your group that may come from the public, so that you could address them going forward pertaining to residents' concerns as they are trying to engage with our process.
Thank you for raising that, and it sounds like all the commissioners are equally committed to that and have been making efforts towards making sure documents are open, and we'll continue to try and make sure that no incidents happen. I'm wondering if, for the sake of time, maybe we could move to group 2 for their report out.
I'll just add, as we transition,
Thank you.
in all the meetings that we've had so far, we have had attendees, that's the word I think it is. There have been no comments raised in the chat, been no hands raised in all the meetings that we have had. So I'm not sure if there is a concern on the user end we can rectify, but there's been overlooked as far as I can recollect from our meeting. Scott, do you have any different thoughts on that? I don't think so.
I would agree from the meetings that I've been a part on Group 2. And I do think that there are probably some documents that the work groups are using as internal communication tools to track our conversation, to track our, as we're doing research and that type of thing. I'm not sure if all of those don't get presented during the working group meetings. They are really just for us to keep track of the work that we are doing. But I would say the meetings that I've been a part of with Group 2, if we are sharing information, if we're broadcasting information, that's information that's either already on the site or that would be made available on the site.
Thank you. So I want to make sure that we made reference to that for the public, or the person engaging with us pertaining to a public meeting. For the sake of time, we're going to move into Group 2's presentation and/or progress update. Vice Chair Sheridan, Commissioner Riley, and Commissioner Intagliata.
We have crafted drafts of our first 2 charter amendments, and once we figure out the bundling and unbundling of issues, we will be able to clarify them. But the first one wraps around the topic of making voting easier, and all sorts of recommendations in here to do so, which I'm happy to go through. The second charter amendment would be making city government more accessible and accountable, is what we wrapped it within. It largely pertains to the Board of Aldermen, suggesting changing it to be called City Council, provide them with enhanced budget authority, a legal department. Commissioner Riley and Sheridan are looking at various options to have some of the city councilors of the future elected at large, and then also looking at the possibility of having the president of the council elected by the city council members rather than citywide. But those aren't in our amendment at this point, but lots of change in both of these. So.
Director Ingrassi, would you share our upcoming meeting schedule?
Sure. So we have a meeting this Thursday at 1:30. That's February 8th. February 22nd, March 14th, March 28th. It's every other Thursday at 1:30.
The first and third Thursday, correct? That's what we are. Yeah, first and third Thursday.
This is a very nerdy comment, but there's a research paper done by some political science researchers about the balance of at-large versus district members within a council that I really like and might send to you all about how it relates to representation, especially minority representation within governments, and they kind of compare different localities. So I'll forward that to you.
Yeah, thanks. We have, we've looked at, I guess the closest example here in the state would be Kansas City, where they have 6 district elected, 6 at-large elected that are also representative of come from a specific district. So additional research would be great there. One of the things that was mentioned is this discussion or thought around moving the president of the council, or currently the president of the Board of Alders, to a elected by the body role versus elected by a citywide election. Some of the things that we've looked at is a city this size and of this complexity that's often elected by the body. That role is elected by the body. I think some of the things that other groups has to do with the interdependence. A lot of that will have to depend on what is eventually discussed related to the ENA, because as the ENA currently stands, all 3 of those board members are elected officials that are serving on that board of ENA. So we really, it's an if this then that if we looked at some of these other changes.
I really want to see the report you're going to send to us, Commissioner Dwight, because we really wrestled with having these at-large council persons and looking at representation, given the fact we just went through a redistricting effort. And so while we had a great model, very simple model in Kansas City, it would require complete redistricting again. And we know what that process was like for the city of St. Louis. So,
and you don't want to look at the examples that we were brainstorming because they were messy. They did not make sense.
Very.
Some of the alderpersons that we have concern with when the redistricting occurred, that areas of the city of St. Louis have larger populations that they have to cover. And the expectation that the coverage for those areas and the amount of residents and amount of people reflective in particular areas is not conducive to one alderperson. Did you guys get any?
I ask a question. Are they concerned about the quantity of people or the size of the geography? Because my understanding is that the population is divided evenly, but there are some more dense populations where their constituents are all within a smaller footprint versus some of the more lessly dense parts of the city where their constituents are spread out. Is that the concern? Is the geographic coverage?
Yes. So I asked the alderpersons to come specifically to speak to you all's work group. I did the same thing. I asked them to come to you all's work group meeting to pose those concerns pertaining to when the redistricting occurred and what they believe is not the appropriate split or the volume or the quantity of individuals that are represented by a particular ward, whomever, the volume or the quantity is, I believe, the issue. But I asked them specifically to come to you all's work group meeting to discuss those concerns. So I was wondering if they came up in discussion.
We have not met with them to talk about that, and it shouldn't be an issue of population because it should be representative as close as possible, and even the split across the wards. But it would be an issue of geography, and I could see if you are an alder person in North St. Louis where there's more less density, you also have more ground to cover. That means there's more streets, there are more potholes, there are more constituent services needs and that type of thing. But that hasn't come up in a meeting with them.
Okay, work group 2, is that all of your discussion? Do we have any more discussion for work group 2? Okay, moving forward to work group 3, executive, personnel, legal, and miscellaneous. Is myself, Chair Nolan Eccles, Secretary Bobo, and Commissioner Crossland. Any member of work group 3, you all could give your feedback on our work groups.
Let me go ahead and start, and then I'll pass it on to Commissioner Bobo. We had 2 meetings, 2 sessions since the last meeting. At the first one, we had as our guests the mayor and also the city register. And then the second one, we had the new director of personnel. And so I will talk about the first meeting, and then Commissioner Bobo will talk about the second. Our first meeting then was a lot of the meeting was spent with, but not exclusively, with Mayor Jones. And she and her staff had done a very thorough review of the portions of the charter that relate to her particular areas of responsibility. And they had an extensive list of areas where there were language issues and there were inconsistencies in what was in the charter and what happened now, titles, all of that kind of stuff that we've heard from other individuals with whom we've spoken as well. And it's no different in the mayor's office. That's the first thing I want to say. She then had some other kinds of issues that of concern, including, for instance, the temporary disability. She wants the language. She recommended that the language be changed so that it follow the 25th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution because it's not aligned with it right now, etc. But when really focused on what were the key items, the 3 key items that she felt were the most critical at this point within the charter, she did have 3, and one was a recommendation to move the elections, the election for mayor, so that we would be on the August-November calendar versus the March and April calendar we're on right now. It is very difficult for the mayor because they get elected, in the spring, and that budget's got to be done then within a matter of just turning it around practically. It really loses the first year of that individual's ability to be able to be involved in budget, etc. So the election is a big one. And along with that, there are a lot of minor kinds of issues, relatively minor in terms of there are no longer 2 newspapers in St. Louis to be able to publish. And there are no longer, it doesn't, all that kind of stuff. Those are issues that are part of the charter right now and that are simply obsolete. The second then recommendation that she felt was critical had to do with her cabinet members. She has a number of individuals who serve as part of her cabinet who don't actually report to her according to the charter, either because they didn't exist when the charter was developed, like the airport. The airport isn't mentioned in the charter even because in 1914 it wasn't an issue. The personnel director is another one that doesn't report to her. The fire department doesn't report to her, and yet these are all part of the cabinet and are necessary to being able to have coordinated government in the city. And even in some cases where people do report to her, she has the ability to hire, but not necessarily to dismiss or, et cetera. And so all of that she would like to see aligned to be able to create that accountability that we all want to be able to see. And then the third one, which may seem smaller, but is of big importance, has to do with the procurement process. And right now, the threshold for competitive bidding in the city of St. Louis is $5,000. And after that, you got to bid it. And she would like to see that raised to $10,000 for competitive bids, and that it be tied then to some kind of an ongoing inflation schedule so that it could be adjusted on an annual basis. She said, and she's right, you have any kind of an emergency and you got to go out and buy something, $5,000, it's gone right away. And then it takes you 21 days, 30 days to be able to get through the bidding process, to be able to, acquire masks or whatever it is you need at that point. Doesn't make sense. So being able to update the procurement process and to have some kind of a built-in number in there is something that she mentioned. I did ask her specifically about the transportation department, since it's been of concern to a lot of people. I did put that question out there. And she said she didn't believe that they needed a separate department. She could see a division within streets or someplace else, but she didn't necessarily see a department. But once again, as we've said, this is, perhaps part of a things are okay the way they are. Why do we want to fix something that doesn't seem broke, at least to them? The second meeting then that we had during the same time period was with the city register, who pled with us to change her name to city clerk, because among other things, people contact her office all the time wanting to register their cars, especially since they closed the office in City Hall. I did not realize that that was an issue. But anyway, the major issue with the city register is just the lack of digitization of their records and the need for those records within so many different aspects of city government, and the fact that they do not have safe and adequate storage right now for those documents, and they certainly don't have them digitized. She has a new grant right now. She has started the process. It's going to be long going and ongoing. But that was at least the thing that I gleaned. There was nothing major with regards to what she did and didn't say in terms of her presentation. I found myself wondering, why there's a register city clerk when we have a county, recorder of deeds, and all of these kinds of issues. That once again is this whole thing about duplicate and relationships because of how things were set up. It may not be something we can solve this time around, but I just want to mention it. And in case you don't know, the register does report to the mayor. That's all.
Thank you. So we also had another work group meeting around personnel, and that was where we invited Director Sonia Gray and also Dr. Bird from that same group to speak. And they outlined several areas and articles mentioned in the charter document. So I'll try and summarize those quickly. A common theme was updating the language to be, when possible, less restrictive, more inclusive, and facilitate greater equity along the scope of human resources and talent management. One thing I heard, for example, was through hire and recruiting best practices lens, there are limitations, namely around filling vacancies. And again, because the document itself is nearing 100+ years old, some of the things that are written in the text of the charter are prohibitive to kind of the way that daily operations should function in best practice case or best use case, if you will. So one thing I heard Director Gray mention was around the slate of candidates. So for example, you might have in the current text 6 candidates when perhaps that's not feasible. So there might be recommendation or space for us to either switch the language to have 3 slots or figure out a number instead of 6. Or perhaps another option is to not enumerate a specific number of eligible candidates at all and just leave that up to those the discretion of the Director of Personnel. I believe there was also a discussion around the title of Director of Personnel, similar to what we heard with City Clerk and that type of name changing. So something that would be more current for 2024 and the next however long would be, again, the language of human resources, because that's essentially what this encompasses. There's also terms around compensation, and I think the recommendation, again, is to leave that piece up to that personnel office. And there was also commentary around reaffirming that no one should be favored or hired, demoted, fired for their beliefs in any regard. And so those were some of the main themes that I think we heard from the personnel work group meeting.
That reminds me that one thing that the mayor brought up that we did, I believe, also here in personnel was around the residency requirement, that some of the city employees now are no longer are required to live in the city because of state law changes, but that hasn't been changed with regards to the charter. But there's a real question right now about whether any employee should be required to live in the city, because if you do the numbers right now, with less than 300,000 individuals in the city of St. Louis, and then you figure out how many of them are adults, and then you figure out how many of them are actually in the work market, and you look at the number of jobs then for which they're trying to hire and the skills, you run out of people relatively quickly for certain kinds of job slots. So if we are to have an effective competitive workforce, then the case is being made that residency may be not a current priority.
And I would say to this gentleman's conversation about his son wanting to move to the city, if we want our employees of the city to live in the city, then we need to give them a city that they want to live in.
Okay.
Like I think that there are some situations in which I can't think of another line of business in which your employer gets to dictate where you live, where your children, which also means where your children live. And so I think that we are limited. We're also limiting to your point, we are limiting the pool of candidates that we can attract to these jobs. I know that might be somewhat controversial because we're supposed to all be champions of the city, and I am a champion of the city, but I just don't think it's your employer's right or expectation to dictate where you.
Absolutely. And one of the things that the mayor was saying is that they are increasingly having to use contractors and non-employees because they can't find sufficient number of people to be able to get through the civil service and the 6 recommended slots, et cetera. And so they're just using contractors at that point instead. So if we want to get rid of the business of using contractors and having employees of the city, again, who care about their jobs, then we have to have as large of an employment pool as possible to enable that. That's her point, at least.
Commissioner Grant, I think that there was some overlap with you all's articles pertaining to the Department of Personnel. Did we get to answer any of those questions that you all had related to the overlap? The issue with the Department of Personnel, there was some overlap with you all's articles pertaining to our article with the Director of Personnel. Were they able to be addressed or rectified, or do you recall what those were? I believe they came up a few public meetings ago, but there's some overlap with the Director of Personnel's article with some of the other articles. So I'm just asking, I don't know necessarily, but I remember it coming up from your work group specifically.
You talking about did Mr. Hummel present that when you guys met, or I'm sorry.
I don't know. My recollection is that the overlap has to do with the fact that you have the ENA, but work group 2 has the Board of Aldermen and we have the mayor. And so that's where the overlap is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask? I wanted to ask a question about what Commissioner Crossland shared about the mayor's report. Can I ask that now, or?
Yes, because I'm also going to ask the commissioners. There were questions posed about the city manager requests from the public. She also alluded and answered and gave her feedback pertaining to that. If we could give that feedback as well, but go ahead, Commissioner Sheridan.
One of the things that when I'm discussing this in the public, or people asking me questions about the Charter Commission, I try to reinforce that this is a commission. These commission changes are not an indictment on who's currently in office or a benefit to who's currently in office. These are structural changes for the city of St. Louis going forward. And that being said, you mentioned that when you had talked with the mayor, she said that there are some cabinet roles that do not report to her, but there are also some roles that she can appoint but cannot fire. Is that a civil service issue, or what is that? What's at hand there?
Well, I believe that the issue she was alluding to there was the personnel director who she can appoint, but then can only be terminated. His or her employment can only be terminated for malfeasance or really dastardly things, quite frankly. And so you can't mediocrity is not a criteria for termination right now. And so there are some issues within that one. And so that was the only one I think she used as an example, correct? Going back to the question then I did ask also about the questions that have been raised or the interests that have been raised about a city manager. And the mayor was not in favor of such a kind of a move. She believed that that those cities that she had an opportunity to view, many of them that she had an opportunity to view, who utilized that kind of a model, didn't have greater accountability than those that do not. And that, in fact, professional city managers had a tendency to move around a fair amount and were not sometimes free and were recruited from the outside many times, and therefore didn't always rise up through the city structure and understand and really be knowledgeable about the actual environment in which they're working. I don't know the truth to all of this. Obviously, these are things we want to pursue as we talk with some of these experts who are brought in so that we can talk with them online. But she felt that, in fact, a city manager encouraged a weak mayoral system as opposed to a stronger one. And so that was at least her opinion at that point. So it remains to be seen.
Can we also speak to the Director of Personnel spoke about requirements, what the requirements of the individuals in the HR capacities should look like that aren't reflective in the current requirements, and why that is necessary or should be a recommendation that we put forth? Do you guys recall that?
I personally don't, but if you'd like to add, that's okay.
She spoke to what the current and the modern requirements for HR directors and personnel and coordinators should be that aren't currently reflective in the charter. And I believe that alludes to or is in alignment with a lot of our articles and a lot of the consistent concern we've heard across the board is what the expectations or requirements or I will say professional expertise a person should have, assuming some of the roles that are listed are reflective in the charter. So I would most certainly encourage us to look at that as well.
Yeah, I think that she was alluding to some of the requirements to hire the individual for that position, which are currently written in the charter, and that they are not what we would consider to be the priority skills levels that we would want for that position these days. And I think that raises the question once again of to what level do we want to dictate what that language should say in the charter itself, because the charter once it's passed, is likely to remain in whatever form it is, for a number of years. And evolution means that these kinds of things, including descriptions of jobs, change.
Yeah, I think that would be way too nuanced to have that type of information in the city charter. Yeah.
Okay, so with that, if we can transition, if we don't have any more discussion for work group 3, I would like us to transition into our drafts are due February 19th. And with the ending discussion on what is or isn't nuance, if as a commission, we can start to deliberate and discuss the actual progress and the steps and how we see this process occurring or how we plan to get to our draft recommendations for the February 19th date, so that we can navigate what is or isn't nuance, what we want to include, what we're looking at, these kinds of things. I think discussing that as a conclusion to this item on the agenda would be most appropriate, so we all can be on the same page.
Madam Chair, refresh my memory, what's the February 19th date?
The date for our work group drafts of the recommendations articles that was moved from top of the year, we moved it to February 19th, I believe, in December.
Okay.
So if we could,
And I think it's 2 weeks before the March meeting. That's what the 19th is, correct? And was trying to look back on our notes. Did we say 2 weeks before that March meeting or 2 weeks before the next public hearing? Because isn't there a public hearing in March also?
Yeah, but I do believe
Is it
that
that
it's
March
2
meeting?
weeks before the meeting.
Okay,
so
the
that
public
we
meeting.
can
Got it.
discuss it there, and then we can take the results of our discussion to that March meeting. Just for clarification, Chair, I had thought that it wasn't draft amendments, but drafts of our thinking of what the amendments might be. Now, I'm being a little bit waffly when I say that, because I think just listening to our groups, there's overlap and different things that are going to be happening. And what we want to do is we want to get some stuff into writing so we can all start looking at and figuring out what makes sense and what might fit together and what might not. But I don't know whether, and this is why I'm asking, I don't know whether that has to be in amendment form at that point or whether that simply has to be something in writing. And I'd like to hear what the group thinks about that.
Yeah, I think I agree with you that there may be a spectrum of levels that there may be things that are like, we know exactly what the language change would be, but there may be things that we know a solution is needed here and we want that. Here's a description of what that might look like, but we're not sure exactly how this interacts with another work group or how exactly we would change it in the charter. So I would support the allowance of levels.
I think that's especially important given the fact that, as we just alluded to a moment ago, we've got overlap between the working groups themselves. And somehow or another, all of this, by the time we get a meeting or two further into this, it's got to start gelling. But I don't think it's going to have gelled by the 19th because everything will be coming in the first time.
And I also think a lot of us are going to be relying on the city councilor's office to help with the drafting of the language. And I just don't think that that's a lot to add, a lot of capacity that we would be throwing, or a lot of requests that in a very short period of time. So I like this idea of just what are the areas of change that that we're hearing from, that we're recommending, and then using the November or the March meeting to discuss that and look at the overlap.
Yeah, initial priorities. That's at least when I think about it, it's all about, what are the initial clusters or priorities, and having that in writing so we can all review each other's and see how it might or might not fit. Out of that then comes draft amendments.
okay, there it is. Okay, just a further discussion, we're looking at basically doing a summary version for each work group to document where you all are pertaining to what bucketed focuses you want to have related to your articles? Or are we wanting to continue discussing where we are? So this is what the concern is we have to discuss what the steps of progression towards getting to what now looks like August for submitting to the ballot looks like. So if is the first step summarizing where or what we recommend for each article, or is it a summary of all of our articles from the work group? How do you all want to proceed?
My suggestion is that the article development exists on a spectrum, and so there are some things that our work groups have that are at the end of that and they're ready to be put into language, but there's some that may not be. So the invitation would be for work groups to submit an update on their priorities, including those that are at near the end of the development and are ready, but to also chronicle what things that they're investigating further. And that could be like an issue. Maybe the 3 levels are, this is an issue, we recognize the challenge our work group wants to tackle, but we don't have a solution yet. A level could be, we have a solution, we just don't have charter language for it yet. And then there could be, here is a fully written amendment submitted. That might be a way. The commission had a process of tracking calls to action that were submitted by work groups, and it built over time, but they would report also on what they were working towards.
So I think it sounds like a summary. So the first area of the summary is if you've completed or you've come to a conclusion on a particular area pertaining to an article, that's a section of your summary. The second area of your summary would be, for lack of better words, unfinished business, areas of articles we still have to do more research on, navigate, ask more questions, interview pertaining to. And then there's a section in the summary for areas we may need to convene with the city councilor's office for language clarity. Is that the consensus?
I would recommend that third area there, that we not worry about that, or certainly February 19th. Everybody here should bring clear ideas that anybody could read and understand, and so that we can discuss them fully. And if we did that, and if you said, well, there's 2 or 3 items here that we're ambivalent on or we're still researching, that would be great. I would strongly recommend that we not move to legal language or composition at this point.
Yeah, and I would say that the second of the 3 buckets that Commissioner Dwight mentioned, it's about, we're still doing research, but it's also about, that's the area where there's possible overlap or some massaging that will need to be done because of different issues that are coming in from the different work groups.
Are we submitting these summaries as work groups, as individual commissioners? How are we navigating the completion of the summaries, including distribution of them?
I thought that we were supposed to make recommendations out of the work groups with 2 of the 3 work group members passing them out. Is that what I remember reading from one of the earlier notes about how we were going to be operating this process? Or is that something else I'm remembering?
I think it's appropriate to discuss it now to determine how we would want to do that. I think as we agreed in the December meeting that the evolution of the original notes may have changed at this point. So it's definitely open for discussion for us to determine how we want to do that aspect of it, the aspect of compiling the summary and the distributing to each other. Are we distributing to the public? Are we updating the website with our summaries? Are we distributing those summaries at the March public hearing? Those are some of the questions we would want to answer in this forum.
Yeah, I would support us making those open to the public and including them in the notice documents online. Like our vice chair said, when we're taking our individual notes to track things versus when our work group creates a work product for purposes of Sunshine that's supposed to be available. And so I do think that kind of, here's a work group product on where we are in the process would be great to have open to the public.
I would strongly encourage each work group to bring, here's the items that we believe should change in the charter to that February 19th meeting. It should be publishable, and it should go on every platform for discussion among anybody.
Yeah.
Scott,
Clarification.
It's not a meeting on the
Yeah,
19th.
it's not a
It's just a deadline. It's our due date for our homework to be ready for March.
So our version of have them in, are we having them into the Charter Commission staff, to our work group folders? What is having it in?
I would think that having them in means that they have to be placed in the folders because they have to be posted 2 weeks in advance of the next meeting so that we meet our public information requirements. And that would mean that we have to back it up then, and the work groups then will have to discuss, and if they're going to discuss, or whether we're doing them individually and then posting, whatever it is, we got to be done in our work group structure in time to be able to post on the 19th.
I just want to make sure people realize that February 19th is a holiday.
The final question listed for the summaries is, we're providing those summaries to the Charter Commission by way of the folder pertaining to our work groups. We know that the 19th is now a holiday, or it's always been a holiday. We're going to have them prior to that. Does every work group meet at least once prior to that date? Prior to the 19th?
Yes.
Okay. Every work group meets prior to that, so we should not have any conflict pertaining to having the summaries into our work group folders for the Charter Commission to complete the activities of publishing and distributing to the public by way of website and agenda for the next public hearing. I also want to make mention that the March 4th special meeting is with National Civic League, where myself and Sheena Hamilton had a briefing pertaining to what can be discussed. And I think giving them our summaries will help them to help us with the recommendations in how they should be formulated or what should be concentrated on based on what all the work groups want to focus on. So I think that would be an added help to them to help us with what their presentation is. He was asking a lot of questions about, how to help us and what topics he should concentrate on, giving the vast source of knowledge that they have. So I think that the summaries would help them, again, to help us craft our recommendations in the future. So that March 4th special meeting, I think is going to help all the work groups to define what it is that we're looking to do with our recommendations pertaining to the articles. I just want to make sure I mentioned that. Okay, so I will provide the Charter Commission with what the process that we're going to take for the February 19th submission of the articles, submission of the recommendations by way of summary, and what to look for and how we're going to move forward with that. If there is no more discussion, I would like to move to the next agenda items.
Question.
Forward in the
So just to be clear, March 4th is a special meeting and the 6th is our regular meeting? Or is it the other way around? The 4th is our regular meeting and the 6th is the special meeting?
Let me make sure.
I believe March 4th now is 2 meetings. Special meeting to, was Commissioner O'Reilly, you walked in a little bit late, so maybe you missed that, but there's a special meeting on the 4th, and then we're moving It was proposed and voted on to move the time of the standing meeting from either 4:30 or 5 o'clock
Okay,
due to Parliamentarian Garth's availability.
okay,
So we'll do, on the 4th, there'll be 2 meetings, special meeting and then our general commission meeting.
okay. And then go ahead.
Special meeting is virtual.
Okay. And then my second question is, or just want to confirm, we will have a public meeting on the 4th, which means the public can come and give comment on our recommendations, which we posted 2 weeks beforehand. So I know that we say that, but that gets lost that every time we meet.
Yeah.
All meetings are public meetings, not a public hearing. Right, yes.
Just want to emphasize that once again, public comment is welcome and encouraged, and we'll have, okay, thank you.
Yes, you're absolutely right about that. I stand corrected. I thought you meant a public hearing, and I think we're just going to discuss that now.
Is agenda item number 8, yes. Okay, so agenda item number 7, Parliamentarian Garth is not here to address the proposed amendments to the rules of order and procedures, so I'm going to convene with him and the city councilor's office pertaining to those items and put this back on the agenda for the March meeting. The next agenda item is discussion regarding commission public hearing and meeting coordination and public engagement. The city councilor's office and charter commission staff provided us with a memorandum in our document pertaining to their updates related to public hearings, public meeting coordination, the budgets, everything that we presented as a concern in the January meeting. I believe they have addressed here, and I will give you a few moments to read through and for us to discuss as a commission any concerns that we have.
And once people have had a chance to read through, I can address the breakout part of that concern. Go ahead. Yes, so it seems that in our effort to be as community-oriented as possible, we said that all parts of our meetings of every sort need to be video recorded and available virtual, which I think is aligned in spirit. But when it comes to our public hearings, it actually limits our ability to get community input because we can't do what's a community engagement best practice, which is breakout groups, which allows more space for community members to raise their voice. These breakout groups are not for the purpose of commission business happening, but for greater community input. So we could change the rules of order to carve out a space for where it doesn't need to be recorded, specifically that during in-person public hearings, for the purpose of community engagement and input, not for commission business, breakout groups do not need to be video recorded or conference live. And I have a couple provisions, like as long as that just make sure that the public knows that we're not using it, for any business, just for community engagement. So those provisions could be, as long as they're publicly noticed in the agenda ahead of time, as long as they're open to all attendees, that, there's no limitation to joining any of the breakout groups, that the breakout groups don't have a quorum of voting members of the commission. And then lastly, that notes from those breakout discussions are reported back out immediately after in the videoed and live conferenced larger public hearing. So that would be I have some language for this, but would be my proposal for a change to the rule of order.
So your recommendation this evening?
Yes, I recommend that. Can I make a motion even before discussion? Is that fine? I make a motion for the language that I just enumerated. Should I read it out again? That during an in-person public hearing, breakout groups for the purpose of deeper engagement with community input may be used and do not need to be video recorded or conference live, as long as they, 1, are publicly noticed on the agenda, 2, are open to all attendees, 3, are not composed of a quorum of voting commission members, and 4, notes from the discussion are reported out directly afterward in the public hearing and video recorded.
Secretary Bobo, can you take our vote, please?
Okay, first, was there any other discussion? Are we good to vote? Okay. Well, Chair Sheridan has left for a moment, so I don't know if we can vote just now.
So while we're waiting, he probably
Maybe we should
Oh,
just.
7, we have a
Wait, tell me- Yeah,
majority.
that's the point.
So all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Dwight. Do we have any other discussion from the memorandum from the commission staff?
I have an issue as I was reading through this.
Do we have a date for next public hearing?
It is for this body to determine the date, and the commission staff coordinates how that occurs, just like we did the first one. So
I'd make a motion to look at March 26th.
March 26th, we have a time, we have a location. So if we can discuss as a commission where we would like to have our next public hearing and time.
I wouldn't be able to join, but that's not necessarily a reason not to have it. But
I will.
Would you say, Commissioner Dwight? I didn't hear him.
I have a conflict, but that doesn't mean if a majority of the commissioners are able that it shouldn't happen.
I may not be in town that day, but
Okay, do we have another March date that works for the majority for a public hearing?
28th, that Thursday.
That entire week is good for me.
Okay, the 28th. Are we doing the same time as last time? Or do we have a conflict with the time as well? Okay. Do we have any recommended locations? I know that Commissioner Green wants to, I believe you've mentioned a few times, different locations or different areas for public hearings. Do we have any recommendations for locations?
We are going to move it around, but if you want to do work groups, then that's going to require a different kind of layout. And so I'm not sure we're prepared tonight to come up with a location.
Yeah, I don't know that we have to decide. Maybe we just have some suggestions and staff can, but there are many locations that can do that. There's the O'Fallon Park Rec Complex in North City. The International Institute has plenty of space for that and breakout groups. Those are both, densely populated as well as close to a variety of, representative populations. So.
Okay. Commissioner Dwight, could you provide us with a list of locations that you just named? And we're looking at the March 28th date at the same time as the last public hearing. Is that correct? Is everybody okay with the time and the date?
Yeah.
Commissioner Dwight's going to send us the list that he just communicated or stated, and the commission staff will begin to coordinate our March public hearing, if that's okay with everyone. I would like to entertain a motion from the commission pertaining to those details.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those opposed? The motion carries.
Thank you. Do we have any discussion pertaining to the commission budget that we also brought up in January meeting pertaining to community engagement efforts, costs, expenditures, and what is outlined here in commission budget request from the commission staff?
I don't have a question about the commission budget specifically, but there was an issue that came up in the memo that I just as a group like to get some consensus on. And that had to do with the large number of remaining interviews Zoom interviews for knowledge building that could be scheduled over the next number of months. And I would like to, as a group, have us, simply let Counselor Hamilton and her staff know that wherever possible, if they could multiple book some of these events for the same time slot, rather than us having meeting after meeting after meeting, it would be much easier than doing it the way we are right now.
Yes, I think she communicated in here, the commission staff communicated that, well, to us via email, that they've begun to put, especially the professors, on a panel design for the topics and for the discussions and the issues, so that the meetings aren't as heavy on our schedule, given that we're winding into the aspect of recommendations. So she's decided to do a design of panel discussions for the professors, the entities, and associations.
Okay, good, because what's in here still is talking about individual.
Did we see the $25,000 budget that Director Payne has notified the commission staff that a budget transfer request has been prepared in the initial amount for us February 21st, 2024? Did we see that in the memo?
Yes, and yay, that's exciting.
So I just want to make sure that we are aware of what is available for the sake of community engagement pertaining to efforts that we're doing going forward.
Yeah, do we really need these lavalier microphones? It seems like a heck of an expense.
I think we use them for the sake of communication clarity so that everyone can hear.
Yeah, but $12,000 seems like a lot.
And going out to bid, just the time delay of bids.
Time delay is a mess.
I think it
I appreciate the budget. I would respectfully submit that everything here is, other than the microphones, which may or may not have a benefit, although we have these right now, so I'm not sure what else we need. The rest of the items here seem to me inadequate to the free publicity that could be generated by the PIO staff in the city councilor's office. I would recommend we not spend any money until we have a much more comprehensive idea of what we want to get across and be clear with the public. Otherwise, we will wither away the little money that we have.
Agreed.
Can we entertain a motion to the microphones from the suggested budget and any other items that you all would like to have removed from the budget?
Do we, just a point of clarification, do we need to do that? I mean, it's just, the budget amount has been allocated, the $25,000. I think when we want to make a spend against that, that would require a motion, but I think these are just estimates of what costs would be for these items. My thought is we don't necessarily need to remove these items. Does anybody else?
Yeah,
have an
this
opinion on that?
looks like just a response to your request in October for some information. And so it doesn't look like this was what the budget was prepared with. It's simply a guesstimate of what some things might cost.
Yes, and I also think that we need to, as Commissioner Tagliata mentioned, there are items that may or may not be here that we may want the commission staff to reflect in the budget, but the total body has to be in agreement and in alignment with those things, and the commission staff are looking for us to do that in the public meeting forum versus via email and different discussions. So if there is any area in which you want the commission staff budget to reflect, we would have to present it in this forum, in the public meeting.
I would just say for today's meeting, I personally don't have a request for spending any of the 25,000 that I would, I would bring that at a future meeting.
Thank you. Any other discussion for the
Yeah,
commission
I don't
staff?
have any recommendations in terms of how to, how to spend money, but I would be interested in knowing how Meta would be able to parse the email addresses for its accounts for city address, if they're able to pull city addresses, and what the advertising schedule might be for it, because that might be an interesting place.
What are you asking, Anna?
Facebook ads.
Right, so Facebook
Yeah.
gives you immense targeting capacity.
Right,
at
right.
a cost. So you can
And I'm
do-
interested in the cost, I
Yeah,
guess.
you can do it by zip code, by all sorts of demographic. You can do lookalike contests, so you could, if you ever had a list of likely voters somewhere, you could actually give it to Facebook and say, give us what is a lookalike group. So they give you people who fit that same bill and profile. You can do that all the time. It just costs a lot of money,
Yeah.
but it's
Well,
great.
that might be, depending on how we parse the list, that might be an interesting way to provide some outreach.
Commissioner Crossland, would you like to entertain a motion pertaining to adding social media advertising to the commission budget?
Can I make a quick comment?
I don't recommend we add it, but I do recommend that we learn more about it.
Okay.
I think Director Ingracia, about time, is that?
Thank you. I just wanted to add that we would need to make sure with city officials, I don't believe the city has ever advertised on social media. I know that they do have some presence on social media, so I would want to just check that what hoops we would have to jump through. I know you have to get permission as a government or any sort of campaign-related type stuff from Facebook, and that takes time. So it might be a good request for somebody to look into for you.
Well, what I would recommend there, instead of advertising on social media, I think it's wholly appropriate for us to ask the city councilor's office to promote through social media platforms. No problem. And I'm sure that they probably do it already. I'm sure that public information officers throughout city government already post on neighborhood associations who have Facebook pages. So I think we should just recommend that they do that to widen the message of what we're trying to ask, which is attendance at meetings and public input.
We don't want to put forth a motion pertaining to the commission staff completing any form of research pertaining to social media, marketing, or advertising. It's just discussion, correct? Okay. So moving to the next item on the agenda, I call to entertain a motion for adjournment.
It has been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, the motion carries.
Thank you.